Okay, so like I said, we'll start with the different ways in which we can start to extract the drawing types from this. The first thing you might want to do is, in order to kind of complete the elements of this, is to generate some contours as the last kind of defining component. Rhino's incredibly efficient at generating contour lines where you can assign all sorts of different elevation level points, and actually even in a series of directions, which will be kind of useful if you ever want to do cross-section cuts. You can use that same approach in that way too. So I'm going to go ahead and, like any other program, you have your layers. It's best to be well organized, especially in the last phase of this, because we're going to be exporting these into a photo or a Illustrator file. And what's great about that, when you export it to Illustrator, it'll actually retain all your layers. So you can actually select objects by the layers and not have to kind of dig around in that drawing to figure out where it is. So that's always a good thing to keep in mind, is managing your layers. So let's just go ahead and create contours. Well, let's make that. Let's find something that'll work good with that. Green. So I'm gonna make that my active layer by making sure that it has that check mark. And now I'll just select everything because I want it to actually run a contour through all the objects. What's nice is you can have the contours go through just one object type or everything that's selected. So right now I just wanted to do a contour for everything. So I'm gonna type contour, real surprising name right there. It asks for the base point. So where are you going to start? I'm gonna go ahead and select at the bottom of this channel.
Are you looking for your low point?
Yeah, sometimes you don't necessarily need your low point. You really just need the direction. It's going to register wherever the lowest point is based off of everything that's selected. It's pretty powerful in that sense of being able to calculate that. I usually just do that just in case. So now it's asking, right, so the perpendicular. So because we're doing contour lines, we're looking to use the vertical direction. So if I double click here, I can go to my front view. I can hold shift to make sure it goes up. And now it's asking for the distance between contours. So like I said, you can assign its own numeric value. Right now it's set to 1/2 foot. That might be a little too intense. Let's try 1. I think this is in feet already. Yep. So I'll just do 1 foot contours. Let's go back to the perspective so we can actually see what it does. Now it starts to draw it all the way up. Hoorah. So let's go ahead and turn off all these. And now you can see here's your contour drawing. As easy as that. And so you can see that it'll capture wherever that channel is. It cuts through the walls, the stairway, all your beautiful earthwork. So that's one way in which you can start to already add more information to that. Something to also keep in mind, depending on the surface type, this one's a little rigid. You can always smooth those out by rebuilding a surface. So let's turn off our contours and make the landform the main layer. So like I said, it's a little rigid, so you can always type to smooth these out. You can type rebuild. Oops. Open poly surface. Maybe not this way. So you can actually, we can select that object. The way Rhino works is it's really made up of points, and then it starts to interpolate the information from that. So I can go to my points icon here, extract points. You'll see that does a lot of this kind of interpolation where you have points outside of that surface because that's what's creating some of those undulations. With those points selected, I can then type patch. You can change the density or the quality of that surface based off of these values. So the higher, the more refined it's going to be. Because there's a lot of these points on the outside, it's probably going to create something crazy. So I'll hit OK. You can see that it kind of creates that surface way beyond those boundaries. So be aware of that. The way to resolve that is that you can actually, let's go back to here. Yeah, that was kind of funky that they had those points out there. So we can always drape points over that. So if I go to my top view, let's use drape points, drag a window to create points. Oops, I did too much. Let's turn off everything else. So now I have points just on that surface. And the last thing I want to do is to make sure it stays within that edge. I want to actually get the border of this object. So I'll do curve from objects, duplicate border. So now I have this highlighted curve around it. In order to organize some of this, I'm going to select it all. I'm just going to hold Control to deselect that original surface. So I have all my points as well as this border. And now I'll run the patch tool again. Hit OK. And now so I should have two surfaces here, a surface and a poly surface. So this is our new surface. Let's get rid of all that original stuff. Or that. So you can see how this one's much smoother than this one. So there's a couple techniques in which you can start to reconstruct different surfaces to refine them. So a little off track, but still a good thing, especially since we're all trying to create awesome landforms. Okay, so let's turn the rest of these back on. So we have our contour lines, we have our different objects. This is where you want to start to, like I said, begin extracting this information for drawing types. So the first thing you probably want to start with is that site plan drawing. So we'll double click on this. Forgot to mention before, you have all sorts of different viewports to look at this. I usually work in perspective so I can orbit around everything. But now I'll go to my top view. I'm going to go ahead and again, select everything. And you could technically do the export and essentially extract everything. When you export objects from Rhino to Illustrator, you're only going to get the curves. You aren't going to get an actual surface to work with in Illustrator. And that's something to definitely be aware of, especially when you start to realize that some of these surfaces are made up of a bunch of different geometry. So it's going to actually capture some of that information. So sometimes you might want it, sometimes you might not. So if I scroll down here, in order to not capture that, you can go to your properties panel and choose where it says show surface ISO curves, turn that off, and that'll help clean up some of that excess. So the terrain's still a little geometric, but that's fine. So now we have everything selected. I'll type make 2D, and this is something that we're going to use continuously in all these drawing types because it actually starts to understand that there's objects on top of other objects. So it'll actually, you can have it decide to ignore the geometry underneath it so it truly looks like a top view drawing. Or you can even have options to show that hidden line. So if you want to show something underneath another geometry, you have that option. And it actually organizes it really well so that it'll create a layer of all the solid lines or the solid curves, and then a separate layer for all your hidden curves. So when you go into Illustrator, you can select your hidden line curve and make those dashed lines versus everything else being a solid. So it becomes really powerful in how you can start to assign curves by their properties. So I'll have that selected. In this case, I'll turn on show hidden lines just so you can see what that does. You can even have tangent edges. This works well if you're looking at a perspective and you have your eye line is almost flush with a curve. It'll actually capture that curve of those landforms. So let's go ahead and rename this plan lines. Hidden lines can just be plan hidden lines. I don't want the tangent. I don't know why it's giving me that option since I don't have it selected. But if I click it on and click it back off, it'll turn that layer off. In this case, we aren't using any clipping planes, so we don't have to worry about that either. So I'll go ahead and hit OK. It'll take a second. And like I said, so you really don't need your surface layer on because you've used the contours for that. So you can even just turn that layer off. And now you have a nice, well done plan drawing. You can see here's your hidden line. So if you want to see what it looks like without those, oops, let's turn. You can see how a lot of the white lines from that channel were considered hidden. But there you go. Now you have, and you'll see when I go back to my perspective that it's actually projected it all onto a flat plane. Let's recalibrate this. So you can see it's all like perfectly flat, which works well for Illustrator. So there's your flat drawing. I'll try and speed it up a little. Is there any questions so far? Okay.
Is there a way to go from contour to a 3D model?
Absolutely. So, yeah, it's a great question. So sometimes you might be already provided the contour lines. Let's go ahead and turn these off real quick. So yeah, let's say we just have our contour lines. I'll even select everything else to be off. So you're just given contour lines. There's a couple ways in which you can do this. You can select all your curves and type. It's probably not going to like that you have this undercutting or this overlap of objects, but most likely you'll be given just a contour drawing, so you probably won't have that. But all you have to do is select those contours and type patch, hit OK. Like I said, probably because it doesn't have that, it's not going to like it. But you can see it does its best considering some of those oddities. But patch is usually the go-to tool to transform curves or contour lines into an actual surface. So the patch tool, you can even, if any of you ever get into Grasshopper, there's also some components that can do it a little bit better. But for now, usually the patch, you If you go to this tool right here with the surface and you click down, you can see there's a couple options. So there's surface from network of curves, loft, 2 or 4 edges. Here's the patch tool. There's also another one that a lot of people like to use is the Drape Surface over objects. That's another option, or surface from point grid. So if we were to see a series of points that are at different elevations, that'll also work well.
Do you need to bring in like Z value information on GIS?
It depends. Usually, if you're doing it something from GIS, that information is going to get coded in that file. So I'm not sure which file type it needs to be. Rhino can bring in a lot of different file types, and if you export it as a CAD file, I'm going to assume that that metadata is going to be there, and Rhino will be able to register that. It's when you do it something from like Illustrator where it's working on a flat plane that it won't have those Z values. But for the most
what you just did is you created it from a 2D drawing anyway, so
Mhm.
it didn't necessarily matter.
Right.
Okay.
So what was it? What I've done a lot of times, you'll get sometimes from a surveyor the points from all the plots or all those plotted points. You can take all those plotted points and bring them into Rhino and create a surface from that as well. I had to actually do that for my thesis project where we had a surveyor that plotted all those points, and we were able to create a 3D model from that.
You use plotted specific elevation points?
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Yeah. It depends. Obviously, the more points you have, the more defined that landform is going to be, but it can work simply just from a series of points.
Sometimes when you bring in like contours from GIS, it has like thousands of vertices in there with the curve. And when I try to do like a patch command, it
Destroys it.
kills my computer.
Uh-huh.
So is there a way to clean up those curves?
There is. So let's just select a couple of these curves. This goes back to that tool I use called the rebuild. If you were to select those, you can actually see how many points there are on this. So I'll turn on my points. So you'll see, I'm assuming you have like a really tight series of points on that. So it'll help clean it up. Obviously, you have to be wary of how many points you remove because you'll start to lose the resolution of that. But for the sake of the question, I'll go ahead and select those curves. Let me make sure I actually have them all joined. So I'll just type join. Like I said, I'll take these, I'll type rebuild, and this is where you can actually determine how many points are going to make up those curves. So right now it defaults to size 10. You can start to see what that actually creates with these new cyan lines. So obviously you lose that kind of sharp corner, but you can always increase that to start to get some of that resolution back. So if you use the rebuild tool, that's the way in which you can reduce that point count. All right, great questions. So let's go. So what I'll show next, just for the sake of time, is doing section cuts through this. And what's great with this approach too is that it'll not only create the profile, but it'll, depending on the detail of your model, you can even get the thickness of this. This workflow is the exact same for doing a floor plan. So if you have like a pavilion or a building that you want to actually cut through the walls, it's the same exact process. It's just a matter of where that cutting plane is, right? So section, we have the vertical cutting planes. For the floor plan, we'll have a horizontal cutting plane. Same exact fundamentals. So because they're very similar, I'm just going to show one, in this case, the section plane cuts. So you could use that approach of using a contour and essentially tell it to create contours this way, and then you can physically cut away your objects, which may or may not be good. Maybe there's some purpose for slicing your model into different objects, or you can actually use a clipping plane in Rhino, which is very similar in SketchUp where you have that section plane cut. But the great thing about this is that it'll work in tangent with your Make 2D drawing. So I'm going to right click my viewport. I'll go down towards the bottom and select clipping plane. Like Rhino or like CAD, Rhino has this command line up here where you can change different settings. In this case, I want my vertical or my clipping plane to be vertical, so I'll select vertical. Start of edge, it really doesn't make a difference how big your clipping plane is. You can have it go the entire expanse of your model, or you can keep it fairly small so it's manageable. It's going to create an endless clipping plane in whatever axes you draw this. So I'm going to hold shift again just to make it orthogonal and perpendicular to my model. And then I'll just draw it to go up. And now you can see that you have this box with an X through it and a line that's pointing in the direction of that section. So I'll select this. The other good thing to have selected in Rhino is your Gumball option towards the bottom. This is what gives this little neat apparatus where you can drag things along an axis or even rotate them. In this case, I want to start dragging it towards the model. So I'll just click, hold, and drag this green arrow, and you'll see that as I move it, let's move in a little bit closer so you can really see it working. So I'll grab this green arrow and I'll just start to drag. And now you can see that just like SketchUp, you have that ability to create a series of section cuts. This isn't actually creating the section cuts. We have to add a couple more steps, but you can see how fluid and easy it is to capture that. So you can see where to create that section cut where some of those landforms are. You can drag it towards this bridge with the stairs. You can see how it captures all those treads on the stairway again. Depending again on the detail of your model, the more information will be available in your drawing itself. So be aware of that. If you want to capture a lot of detail, you can model that out and know that Rhino will be able to sufficiently capture that. So, like I said, you can really have a lot of control over where this is working. So, obviously, we want to have a physical drawing of this, not just a intangible representation. So I'm just going to pick this one right here where I can capture the cool treads with the stairway. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go ahead and turn off, or I'm going to hide this because I don't want my clipping plane to be in the way. So you can go ahead and select an object and type hide to just kind of make it disappear temporarily. You can type then show to bring it back. So hide and show are the commands to turn objects on or off without dealing with the layers panel. So type hide again. What's great about this is that going back to that make 2D command is that it's going to capture whatever angle that viewport is in. So I could stick with, I think it's this one. Let's change it to shaded to make sure. So it's not the front. Set view to back then. Oh, so let's actually make sure. I think it actually is the front, but I'll show you why it's not working. Set view to front. So let me type my clipping plane. So show. Something to be aware of is that because I created it in the perspective window, it's only active in your perspective window. In order for it to work in this section view, I have to have my clipping plane selected. You'll see there's this new properties panel with all the different viewports you have. And now I'm going to select whatever that viewport is. So front, front. And now I have this cut being made through it. What you'll also know is that whatever layer your clipping plane is on, so you can see it's got that cyan color, the profile of that section cut is also highlighted in a thicker line weight of that same layer. So what's great about this too is that you'll have a layer of where that actual clipping or that cut line is, in addition to all your other layers, which are going to include the objects behind this clipping plane. So go ahead and hide this again. I'm going to select everything, type make 2D. So again, going back to that make 2D command. The thing to keep in mind though now is to make sure that you also have this hidden clipping plane layer selected. So I'm gonna rename these now. Section lines. Oops, I hit enter too quickly. Let's undo that. The section lines, visible clipping planes. So section cut. Hidden lines, I'm not going to worry about the hidden lines in this case because it'll just get too busy. And always have that maintain source layers on. So you'll see now you have your visible lines and your clipping plane line. I'll hit OK. I'll go back to my top or my perspective view. And it's probably behind that section cut. So let's type show. I need to deactivate this. So now I'm gonna take that over and now you can see, oops, that's weird that they're at different angles. Oh, that's because it's my bad. I didn't do it all. So select sublayer objects, select sublayer objects. And now you'll see here's your section cut. And as you can see, if I turn off the section lines, you're left with just that profile. So it's a little hard to see, but there's the landform, there's the bridge and stairway. So this again helps you know which lines to give that thicker line weight in Illustrator versus all the objects that are behind that. So it even has those contour lines kind of stacked up as well as the profile of that landform, which is cool. But like I was saying before, whatever that angle or viewport that you're in, that make 2D will capture. So let's go back. Let's do one more thing. So I'm going to turn this clipping plane back on. Make sure perspective is active. Maybe you don't want to use that conventional straight on look to your section cut. Let's hide this again. Maybe you want to do a cool section perspective. I don't know. Something that's pretty popular and common. That's what I use a lot. You can actually just choose like, okay, maybe this is the angle I want to show. I can again, select everything. I'll just do Control A, type make 2D. Let's call this axon section, axon cut, hit OK. And again, I'll just drag this over, go to my top view, and now you have this cool section perspective drawing from that. So pretty neat and powerful. So you can even see that. Let's again turn off some of these layers. So you can see here's the actual profile cut at that angle, as well as all those other objects that are part of that composition. So the last thing to show is, okay, you've created all these great drawings. Now you want to actually use them outside of Rhino. So I always stick within my top view because all these make 2D drawings have been projecting onto that plane. So now, so there's that section cut I did, here's that axon, and here's that top view. So all you have to do is then select your objects. Oops, let's do that section one. So there's our section one. I'll just type export. Make sure to set it to Adobe Illustrator. Let's just do this onto the desktop. Workshop section. It's saved to Adobe Illustrator. What's cool is you can even set it to the scale that you want this to appear in Illustrator. So 1 feet equals, so 1 feet in model space equals the inches. So you could do 1 inch equals 10 feet, 1 inch equals 100 feet. That's where so you don't have to manually scale it in Illustrator. You can even have a viewport boundary, which is going to essentially draw a rectangle around this window. So if you're doing a series of these, you can use that as a reference point so that every time you do a new one, you can just match the viewport boundary of this drawing with the viewport boundary of another one. That's always really helpful to have. So 1 foot equals 1 inch, sure. Hit OK. I went ahead and did that. Let me open Illustrator real quick. Now I'll just go ahead and do File Open, find that file I just created. So again, Illustrator file, hit Open. And wherever you drew that in your Rhino space, it's going to import it into this. I don't know, it's probably way off the screen. I know it's somewhere. Let's redo that. So the way this is understanding is that you have your grid in Rhino, wherever that is, and then where this is in relation. So let's go ahead and move this to 0, 0, 0 to make sure it is in fact, oops, 0, 0, 0, to in fact move it to the center of my workspace. I'll type export. Let's make sure that this is closed. Because it was too far off the workspace, it can't find it. And there you go. So here we have it. And it's also extremely large still at that scale. So go ahead and just shrink it down. And like I said before, this goes back to why it's important to maintain your layer organization, is because Illustrator is going to bring in all those layers that were in Rhino. So you can see this is why I was careful in choosing my layer naming. So I have my section cut layers, I have the viewport boundary layer, and then I have the section lines. So those are all the background ones. Here's all my section cut lines, so I can easily just select all of those, give them their own color and thickness, obviously not like that. Then you can make these much thinner so you have a clear idea of where that poche is versus everything that's behind it. Yeah, there you go. That's the main workflow for all this. Let me go ahead and stop sharing this so it's not a huge file.